All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Via Satellite's Thursday morning conversation. My name is Jeffrey Hill, and I am here with Via Satellite editorial director and my colleague Mark Holmes. Mark, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Jeff. How's you and the family?
We're doing well. We are trapped inside like everyone else. I've got a 2-year-old who is not quite bored just yet with being inside, but I mean we are able to get him outside every once in a while and take a walk and but it's starting to get a little stir crazy as the weather gets nicer. How are you holding up?
Yeah, we're good. I have two daughters. We have two daughters ourselves. One who's 12, one who's 3. So a bit of an age gap. One who's using all her different devices, and another one who just wants to run around everywhere. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously tough for everybody. But we're like everybody. We're just getting used to it, trying to adapt, and go from there. Really.
Yeah. So like everybody working, or with the who is fortunate enough to still be working and be able to work from home, all of our socializing is done now on video teleconferencing. And what you're seeing here is the very first one of these um, via satellite Thursday morning conversations. We're going to be having these throughout the year, or throughout the season with some different people in our industry, and be talking about different topics. But what we thought would be Mark and I, what we thought would be a good first topic to sort of kick these things off is to really just talk about what's in the news right now, which is like what is the impact that COVID-19 will have on the satellite industry. And we'll talk a little bit about the short-term impact, the long-term impact, but like really, since we're all dealing with it on a personal and professional level, we thought this was the right topic to start with. So Mark, I mean, you and I were both at Satellite 2020 in Washington, D.C. when, I mean, people were aware of coronavirus, but it really just in the United States, at least, the week we were at Satellite was the week things really started to accelerate with it. And we ended up, the show closed a day early. And then everybody went into quarantine. I haven't been into the office since Satellite. So, but, while we were at Satellite, what were you hearing in terms of how people were maybe preparing for this kind of scenario? And then we'll talk about what's happened since. But give me your impressions of what you heard at Satellite.
Well, I mean, obviously, I didn't make Satellite in the end, but I think what we saw, particularly in Europe and what was going on in Italy and Spain, that it was sort of getting front page news. I think here a little sooner than in the US. So I think the awareness of the seriousness of it and what was potentially going to happen all over the world, whether it's the UK, US, I mean, it's happening everywhere. So, it was starting to happen in some ways, even before satellite. And then I think, there was this, all of a sudden, there was this real acceleration, obviously, where a lot of countries started to go into lockdown or were considering lockdown strategies. I mean, it just happened very quickly, and it affects every type of company. So whether it's a satellite company, a publishing company like ourselves, healthcare, I mean, every company all of a sudden was having to think of, well, how are we going to go about our business now? And so yeah, I think in terms of our industry, I think one of the unique things about the satellite industry, and I know we say this many, many times, but it really is a global industry. I mean, it's an industry that connects places that otherwise wouldn't be connected. It connects cruise ships, it connects aircraft. It's a very unique industry in many ways. I mean, it's very much uses technology to bring to people who maybe don't have access to the technologies that maybe you and I have living in urban centers in Washington and the UK. So it's interesting when you look at it. The need for communication obviously has never been greater right now. I mean, having access to data, whether it's through contact tracing or things around Corona is incredibly important. So, I think when you look at the impact that it might have on the satellite industry. I think there's some really interesting questions. So I'm going to bring one or two things up with you, Jeff, and we can sort of talk about them. I think obviously one of the big stories that came out over the last week was obviously the sad news in many ways that OneWeb has gone into Chapter 11. Now, if you read those statements, one of the big things that's hinted at in a lot of those announcements is if there hadn't have been this pandemic or this COVID-19 crisis, potentially OneWeb would not have gone into Chapter 11. Now, we obviously don't have a definitive answer, yes or no, to that, but it clearly had an impact on the future of OneWeb. And OneWeb is a very high profile example, but I think you might start to see others over the coming months. So I mean, I'll put the question to you. I mean, when you look at the OneWeb situation, I mean what sort of impact do you think the whole COVID thing had on what happened with OneWeb?
Well, before I answer that, just to go back, I mean, Mark, you're such a staple at satellite. Completely forgot that COVID-19 prevented you from coming to satellite. So right there, immediate impact of the disease on what was going on at satellite. So
well, you had to stop Chase, so you had.
And I feel like it's been it's been years since satellite 2020. It's really only been a month. But yeah, I mean, so to look at what was coronavirus like the main reason OneWeb went bankrupt, or was it the straw that broke the camel's back, or was it just one of a series of incidents that led to this? I mean, I guess we'll figure that out as more becomes known, and as we try to figure out what the next steps are. But I think we all know that constellations are risky. It's a risky business to get into. It's high risk, high reward. OneWeb's story has certainly been one of the more dramatic ones, right? Of the other, I mean, compared to something like Telesat LEO, right, where you don't, it's more very quiet, right? You hear a little bit at a time, but like OneWeb, there was always something happening, whether it was, at one point, there was like a potential merge with Intelsat, and then that fell through, and then there was some fallout with Intelsat, and then there was a partnership with Iridium, and then there was like a lawsuit between the two, and then we apparently a lot of stuff happened with OneWeb during the satellite show, and the coronavirus sort of just kicked these things into high gear, and I mean, the situation progressed very quickly to a bankruptcy. I mean, you and I we're talking to people right now to figure out what exactly happened. In these situations, I think with the fact that coronavirus is forcing everybody to stay home, and that people are getting laid off, and that a lot of the industry's attention is turned right now to how do we operate our own business right now in this scenario. I think we'll hear a lot about it over the next few months. I think we'll get a little bit more insight. I don't think it was one thing. I don't think all of a sudden coronavirus came and OneWeb went bankrupt. I don't think that's the case, but I could be wrong. But what are your impressions of what happened?
Well, I mean, I want to go back to your conversation with Elon, and I think one of the interesting things he said, and he said it in a typical Elon way, half joking but and half serious, about we actually want to we actually want to be the Leo constellation that doesn't go bankrupt. And right now we're like 0 for 8 or some, he made some, he said it in a I wouldn't say flippant way, but a sort of very jokey way. It was a very sort of relevant point with these constellations and the cost of them, and and the fact that you need to spend billions before you even get your first customers. So I think it undoubtedly it had an impact. You just look at some of what SoftBank has done over the past few weeks, and there seems to have been a big sort of change. I think it brings up a very interesting fundamental question there, because whenever we've talked about OneWeb, there was always an element of a mission about it. It was about connecting the unconnected, bringing connectivity to schools. What we talked about with the initial thing with COVID is, one of the things the satellite industry can do is really bring that connectivity so people can communicate better. And again, it's an example now that this hasn't worked. And even OneWeb, there was a big pivot over the last couple of years. They started talking about markets like aviation and things like that. They still talked about this other elements of connecting schools and things like that, but it wasn't, it became different from like the first iteration of OneWeb. I think undoubtedly it did have an impact. I think one of the myths that sometimes goes around the satellite industry is that when there are downturns, market crashes, major global things, that somehow the satellite industry is a little bit immune from these things because there's long-term contracts, there's need for connectivity. And I think there's obviously an element of truth in that, but I think we would be foolish to say that there's not going to be some big impacts on our industry over the next few months, and they're not going to be all positive. And some they'll be positive, there'll be extra demand for satellite connectivity, and there'll be some good things, no doubt. But there's no doubt that the industry is not going to emerge from this unscathed. And whether OneWeb will ultimately be the most high profile, I hate to use the word victim, but high profile organization that has to go down the route that it's gone down, I think that's still to be seen, but I don't think it will be the last.
Yeah. In terms of how it impacts the business, there are going to be positives and negatives. And I think the short-term immediate impacts are all going to mostly be negative, but then there might be some long-term positive impacts in terms of highlighting the importance of connectivity. But let's start with the bad, right? Let's start with the short term here. So we have layoffs because companies are not operating. So we have a lot of people who are furloughed, and we have launches that are being delayed around the world, because of safety concerns. So where do we want to start? Do we, with the launch schedule? We're 2020, 2021 are two of the busiest launch schedules ever in commercial industry. So what does this mean for, how long can this launch delay go before, maybe some other constellations start dropping out?
One thing I would say, and you and I have been in the industry a long time, it wasn't that long ago when there was only like 2 or 3 launch providers, there wasn't that many options. Whereas nowadays, the options are plentiful in terms of rockets and things like that. In some ways, the industry has never had it so good. So I think in that sense, it's a terrible pun, but I think it will ride out the storm okay. I think there'll obviously be some, there's obviously going to be some delays, but I don't think, unless this pandemic ends up really going into the back end of the year, or having a massive resurgence, or before we get a vaccine, I actually think the launch part, and I may be being a bit brave by saying this, but I don't think it will hopefully have like a big impact from a negative. I think launch options are plentiful. I think these are things that can hopefully, get restarted relatively quickly once the environment is a little bit safer as well. I think where the impact will come is more in some of the markets that the industry serves, and we can talk about that as well. But I think, the launch market is in great shape. We've got, there's some real good players in there. There's been a lot of innovation there as well. Huge amounts of innovation over the last few years. Access to space, the price has come down. It's really been one of the most interesting markets, even within satellite, to write about, to talk about, and stuff. So, yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The situation isn't great, but I think if we're talking weeks, rather than a lot of months, we'll be okay as an industry.
Yeah, my outlook on the launch situation isn't as positive. I think that there's a reason why SpaceX is pushing very aggressively to continue launching Starlink, despite now I guess recent reports that there are outbreaks of COVID among all of these launch providers teams. I think that because they're so the schedules are so tight and compact, I think that there has been sort of a we got to go as long as possible. We have to keep going as long as possible and shut down at the very last minute if possible. I think there's just so much demand for launch and so much on the schedule. I think this is going to definitely push things back by at least a few months. But we'll see. Who knows? The schedule, how the schedule is going to play out, and how everybody's going to make adjustments here. But I do think that the if these outbreaks on each of these companies' teams gets any worse, I don't see how you can continue normal launch operations under these circumstances. But we'll see. We'll come back to that. But also layoffs. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of companies start furloughing employees or laying them off. The interesting question to look at is when this passes, and hopefully sooner than later, are we going to have this sort of, are these employees coming back? Are we going to have a labor surplus? Is Satellite 2021, for example, going to be a jobs fair, or we're going to see a lot of people re-entering in the industry, or do we risk losing a lot of talent this way? Maybe some of these engineers go to other industries like software, telecommunications. I mean, the software industry, because of the use of home networking, is doing a little bit better than others in comparison. I mean, nobody's doing great, and I think a lot of companies are not. Everybody is cutting costs. But I'm just curious as to how the labor situation is going to work out. I mean, what does this mean for startups and investors? I've been talking to a few startups and investors for a story I'm working on for Via Satellite. And obviously you can still meet with investors over video teleconferencing, but in terms of production, in terms of your for a startup schedule, getting a prototype ready. I mean, everything gets impacted. Everything gets pushed back, delayed, stopped, slowed, start. So yeah, let's talk about the human cost here, the human impact of COVID.
Well, I mean, I think the human cost is in many ways across all industries, and particularly a lot of tech industries as well. I mean, one of the good things about the industry over the last few years is it has become attractive again to young people to be a part of it. I know when I first started as writing about the satellite industry, there was almost a gallows humor that the industry wouldn't be around in 2020 because it was not seen as particularly cool, and it didn't necessarily resonate. It was a very it was a workforce that was not particularly young, a very experienced, very capable workforce, but very experienced. And back in the first part of the millennium, attracting young people to the industry was actually one of the big conversations of every satellite show, not just our satellite show. So I think in some ways that was sort of flipped, and actually the industry became a lot cooler to young people, particularly young engineers. Lots of interesting projects. So you kind of hope that necessarily won't change, and that I mean, a good business plan, good business model before the pandemic should hopefully be a good business plan and good business model after the pandemic. there is going to be talent out there. And but one of the things we've often seen with this industry is even when people leave this industry, they often find their way back. It's one of those industries that in some ways is we do call it a community, but it really is. And even if sometimes people leave it for 1 or 2 years and do some other things, ultimately a lot of times you see them come back. So yes, there is obviously going to be an impact, but at the same time, I think if people come up with really solid business plans for space-based businesses, ultimately they will get invested in, they will be successful, and then you'll have the domino effect. Will Satellite 2021 be a jobs fair? That's a tough question to ask. I mean, we just want to have a successful and vibrant Satellite 2021. There are some, obviously, you look at the situation with OneWeb. I mean, there's some hugely talented people at that company. I mean, I know quite a few of them, and there's a lot of talent there that you hope can stay within the industry. So, and there's going to be others from other companies who've been furloughed, laid off as well. So, I mean, ultimately, we all want the economy to bounce back. We all want talented people in our industry. It's obviously going to take some time, but the industry overall has been in pretty good shape in recent years. I mean, it's been an industry that has been thriving in many ways, and you would think once the environment turns around that it will thrive again. I mean, I think there's a lot of more intelligent people than me who think this industry has an amazing future, and there's nothing I think to doubt that. But we may lose some talented people because we talk. I mean, I keep going back to OneWeb, but OneWeb might not be the first. I mean, there may well. I mean, we saw LeoSat, which obviously was nothing related to the pandemic, but there's two big constellations that have lost a lot of talented people. Now, can the industry absorb them? Are there huge amounts of other opportunities for them right now? You would have to say probably not, but you would have to hope that over the course of the next few months, things will start to open up, and hopefully we can keep a lot of these talented people in the industry, because it's still an industry even now, even though it's a much more hip than what it was 15-20 years ago. I still think it has a little bit of an identity crisis at times, and so we just hope we can keep a lot of these good people in the industry, because the industry is better for having them in it.
Absolutely. And I want to move on. I want to talk about the impact that coronavirus will have on the telecommunications service, satellite connectivity, mobile connectivity. And I want to bring up a couple of things. First, I want to highlight an article that was posted on April 2nd on viasatellite.com. So IFC Outlook. So this in-flight connectivity outlook post-pandemic, the need for connectivity will be greater than ever. This was a story that was posted by William Calvert. And in the story, William highlighted that self-isolation caused by coronavirus could be seen as an accelerator of the trend toward increased connectivity. So in March of 2020 alone, and these are stats that William highlights here, Verizon reported a 75% increase in gaming traffic in just 1 week. Online shoppers increased 80% year on year in Brazil, 45% in Australia, 32% in France, 29% in Italy, according to Financial Times. Disney Plus is just one of the over-the-top suppliers reporting increased subscriber numbers, with U.S. numbers tripling across a 2-day period. Teleconferencing, I mean, Zoom added 20 million mobile users in a week. And then I also want to highlight what I heard on the our first Oilcom advisory board call, and I'm going to put the Oilcom information for our event, which is still scheduled October 14th and 15th, 2020. We're very confident that things are going to resolve by then, so we're really looking forward to the event. Now, the oil and gas industry is dealing with not only coronavirus, but also a massive oil price drop caused by a pricing war that's going on between OPEC Plus and Russia. And before we got on the Oilcom advisory board call, we were hoping that it wasn't going to be all gloom and doom about massive layoffs. No one has any money to spend anything. But we got on the call and it was surprisingly upbeat, productive, and also our oil and gas operators had a lot to say because there was a lot going on right now. First off, their need to move all of their digital oil field operations from headquarters to thousands of homes created this sort of surge in activity, a scramble to set up these sort of as one of our members put it, Internet of Homes, right? So now the oil and gas remote connectivity network is completely changed, it's completely reconfigured. The industry kind of got a taste of how this would work during Hurricane Harvey, when a lot of people had to work from home. But I mean, really, what they saw, what a lot of these oil and gas companies saw, was an acceleration of technologies that were already kind of in the mix, or were supposed to be kind of phased in. In terms of remote teleconferencing, video conferencing, telehealth, telemonitoring. And that there's a need for bandwidth, there's a need for network security for these home systems, or a need for hardware. So, we were listening to our advisory board members talk, and it was like, man, it sounds like they're busier than ever. And that there's the digital oil field transformation is happening a lot quicker. And that some of these video teleconferencing activities are going to happen over VSAT and over terrestrial and over private 5G LTE. So in a way, there are services and industries that coronavirus is actually going to highlight as highlight the need for telecommunication services, mobile connectivity. Mark, I mean, I know you're working on some events as well, CyberSat Gov, but also you had been working on a Global Connected Aircraft Summit before it was postponed because of coronavirus. Can you talk about what you're hearing on the mobile connectivity front? Because I know you're all on the front lines of this.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, let's just take a step back. I mean, we know whenever we talk to a lot of the big satellite operators, just as an example, and it's not just the operators, it's the antenna folks, and everything. One of the big markets for satellite is mobility. It's something that you see mentioned virtually in every panel session at satellite and other trade shows. And now we're operating in an environment where the cruise industry has come to a halt. The airline industry has pretty much come to a halt. So what does that mean for our industry? I mean, it can mean a number of different things, and I think some of them are also a little bit contradictory as well. Firstly, I think it highlights, particularly for airlines, the importance of connectivity. That's going to be even more important going forward. I think when you look at pandemics of the future, and we aren't even over this one yet, but airlines having access to data and being able to handle situations, more efficient the next time around is going to be a big thing. And they can only do that if they have, connectivity, the use of artificial intelligence, things like that. So the need for connectivity is stronger than ever. But there's a but. One of the airlines that I spoke to, I won't name them, said, well, we're going to have to really strip back our IFC activities now. I mean, these companies are cash squeezed. There's these airlines, and so while connectivity we can talk about as a must-have, and they need it for various reasons, it's a costly investment. I mean, it's not a cheap investment to equip a whole fleet with satellite connectivity. So I think the future is is unclear right now what this means. I mean, the need is still there, and I think hopefully most airlines will find a way, but I think it will get a hit. Now, in terms of the cruise industry, I mean, this is a really interesting one to look at, because if you think about those initial news stories covering the pandemic, a lot of the big news stories focused on people on a cruise ship, that were, that had contracted the virus and were on a ship. And, I mean, there's stories even today as we talk, there's still cruise ships with, a number of, I mean, there's been a number of fatalities, there's a number of people with the virus. So, it is potentially going to have an impact on that industry. I mean, I spoke to a big cruise ship operator earlier this week, and they're obviously confident that that people that like cruises, that are into cruising, will come back. And I think one of the differences between the cruise and the aviation is, I think connectivity on a cruise ship is still relatively new. I think airlines, it's a little bit further ahead with most of the airlines. I still think most cruise ship operators are usually in that process now of really equipping their fleets a lot more. But yeah, I think it's obviously going to have an impact on these businesses. I mean, people probably are not going to book expensive cruise vacations straight away now. I mean, I think there's other issues that we haven't even talked about, things like travel insurance. I mean, if this virus doesn't truly go until, say, next year, and when we have vaccines, hopefully, there's issues in terms of how you potentially deal with this. So, I mean, these industries are going to get hit. There's no doubt about that. But once we get through the other side, are people going to fly again? Of course. Are they going to want to go on holidays? And we live in what I call, quote unquote, an experience world now. People want experiences. It's not necessarily they want to, the world is a lot smaller in many ways than, say, you and I's parents' generation. People can travel all over the world. Everywhere is accessible. People are still going to want experience. They still want to travel and do amazing things. So it will bounce back. But there's no doubt about it that the mobility markets, I think, could take a pretty big initial hit, and that's going to have a pretty big impact on our industry for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact that this will have on network security issues? And you are the chair of the CyberSat events that we have for via satellite, and talk a little bit about what people in the cybersecurity or NetSec, what in their world, how they're experiencing this and what they see for the future. And I'm going to put the CyberSat Gov event information on the bottom here, so you can see the event that Mark chairs. It's pretty awesome. It's also in October this year in Reston. So,
well, I mean, firstly, cybersecurity has been a big issue for last few years. I mean, and it's only going to get bigger. And I don't think really, the pandemic, changes that fact. I think,
Mark, I think you froze.
So, okay. So yeah, I mean, just to circle back, cybersecurity is a massive issue, full stop, right now. I mean, it's been a huge issue in recent years. It'll be a huge issue for the rest of this year and over the next few years. I think where the change has come, and I think this is where it gets interesting when you look at it.
Mark?
Yep. Can you?
All right. While we're waiting for Mark to log back in, I think what we're just having is some internet connectivity issues here. So this is like highlighting. Okay, Mark, you're back. Can you hear me?
I'm back. I can hear you.
Sounds like we both need some more bandwidth. But anyway, just want to, we're going to have these issues as we do these sort of complex teleconferencing discussions. But please continue. You were talking about the cybersecurity event.
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is a massive issue, full stop. I mean, that hasn't changed. I think what is interesting and what we're seeing, and again, this goes across every industry, not just the satellite industry, is that a lot of people are working from home. The workforce has been dispersed to all different places geographically, and that brings up some cybersecurity challenges. That as they say on the CyberSat advisory board called, the bad actors, they're not going to stand still. There's going to be potentially more weak points, and they're going to try and exploit that. So there are some sides. I mean, even when we just talk about Zoom, and it's really weird when you think about it. 3 weeks ago, most people, if you said the word Zoom, would just think, speed or something like that. And now it's one of those it's almost become like a verb. It's like, oh, when you Netflix something, and you do a Zoom thing, it's become the platform that people, at least initially, associate with video conferencing. And we've seen even in the news, and it's made the mainstream news, about privacy issues, security issues with Zoom. So, from a company that was barely heard of a few weeks ago, unless you were really into this stuff and using video conferencing, which, let's be honest, most people, most individuals, and most companies weren't. And now all of a sudden it's front page news, and it's front page news because of security. Now we know, like with CyberSat Gov, we're dealing with some of the most advanced technology on the planet. Very high stakes involved, and people are having to work remotely. And they can't go in offices right now. So if you want to talk to anybody, you're having to do it via a VPN, and you're having to do things differently than how you did it before. So it's obviously going to present security and challenges. But I think what is interesting is, this has happened all of a sudden. I mean, we can go and think, well, look, we had information about this pandemic at the start of the year, maybe even late last year, but all of a sudden, as we said in the first part of the conversation on the week of satellite, it hit everybody really quickly. All of a sudden, we went from a stage where, we're going in offices to, okay, we've all got to work from home. And then things like Zoom became, they almost became part of a global consciousness in a way. So I think there will be big security challenges. I mean, one of the things we always talk about at CyberSat is one of the recurring nightmares is what if we saw a major incident involving a satellite and the potential damage that could do. I mean, and when you have people talk about it at our event, it's pretty scary. I mean, we had just to maybe give some of the viewers a little bit more context here, we had an ethical hacker, I think the best way to describe him, Ken Monroe, come to our event a couple of years ago, and he was able to show in real time vulnerabilities on ships with satellite equipment, and the potential to, just the overall potential to hack into networks, devices, and things like that, and the potential damage that you could do. Now, it was a great presentation because Ken had a great English sense of humor, so I really enjoyed it. But aside from the jokey bits that he was doing, there was some really quite frightening stuff. And one of the reasons why we put CyberSat together is we wanted to bring three communities together. We wanted to bring the cyber community, the satellite community, and the end user community to create one new community in essence. So we felt it was an opportunity to hopefully do something that was really positive for the industry. Of course, we're a commercial publishing company. We want to do an event that is successful, but we actually thought, this is an event that if everything works and it goes well, it can actually hopefully do some really good for our industry and spark some really great conversations. So yeah, I mean, we don't know how long this situation is going to last, but one of the things that I think we are all seeing is that even if the pandemic eases, there's going to be a lot more video conferencing going forward. And companies in our industry, companies outside of our industry that want to talk to our industry will be using these services a lot more. So of course, it's going to have an impact, and
companies.
we'll.
Mark, I think what happened was at least on my end, your video dropped out. But I was just saying during the broadcast before you when we lost your video feed for a moment that interestingly to build on your comment about how your CyberSat.gov advisory board members had to kind of scramble to adjust to operations of people working at home. The oil and gas industry. A lot of the employees on IT teams and OT teams weren't allowed to bring company hardware or computers home with them. So a lot of people had to scramble to sort of buy off-the-shelf equipment to set up their home offices. And a lot of these systems were, it sort of becomes the Wild West at that point, where you have a bunch of devices that aren't approved. And this kind of builds into what Ken was talking about, where you have a lot of these devices on these networks that aren't secure, that are very vulnerable. It's going to be, an issue with both short and long-term challenges here, because in the short term, we had to sort of build these networks and home offices very quickly, and they're very vulnerable. And then, will there be long-term consequences for that? Who knows? But
that's the point, though, isn't it? I think that's the big point. I mean, I think it's not like this shift has been something that you can spend months preparing for and planning for. It's like we went 1 week where we were going to trade shows and we were going to offices, and the next week it was kaboom, finished. There's no, I mean, you didn't even necessarily have short-term planning, let alone mid to long-term planning. So it's going to be a big issue. I mean, obviously that whole video conferencing market. I mean, I was sort of joking to someone the other day that as a publishing company, we've almost become experts in different platforms now, which we'd never heard of a few weeks ago. And I'm sure other companies are going through the exact same processes that we are. And it is a big shift. I mean, I just want to change, if you don't mind, Jeff. I just want to change tack very, very quickly, because one of the things I wanted to mention about the one of the good impacts, I suppose, of the satellite industry, and I think that I'd love to. I mean, again, this could be a whole separate conversation. And one of the things I think I've been most interested in over the last 2 or 3 weeks is seeing the impact of climate change and seeing the world basically almost like being shut down, and factories, flights, whatever, and seeing the satellite imagery of where, the impact. I think that's, I think one of the most interesting quotes I've heard over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and there's been many, was this is perhaps one of the longest climate change experiments that has ever taken place. And I think the satellite industry, what the satellite industry has done in providing, some of this amazing imagery, and a lot of great companies that we know involved in Earth observation, and seeing some of the dramatic changes as a result of this, I think it's one of the more fascinating sub-arguments discussions in our sector. And again, I kind of digressed a bit, but I think that we talked about impact of COVID on the satellite industry, and I think looking at the Earth observation side and the changes to our planet, I think that's also something hopefully we can maybe discuss a little bit more next time.
Absolutely, and sorry to cut you off, but we are right at the end here. Just want to say thank you to everybody who is watching this broadcast. We're sorry that we had a couple of connection drops, but that's exactly the issue we were talking about in setting up these sort of home offices. That we have these. We have a desperate need for more bandwidth and more video teleconferencing technology. But once again, my name is Jeffrey Hill, and I've been talking with editorial director Via Satellite, Mark Holmes. This has been Via Satellite's Thursday morning conversation. We'll have more of these coming up. Mark, you'll be hosting a few of the executives in our industry. Should be pretty exciting. So check out Via Satellite, viasatellite.com, and also on Twitter at Via Satellite. And also check out our On Orbit podcast, which we post every other week on Tuesday, but these will be going on Thursdays. So thanks Mark for joining us. Have a good day, and thank you everybody for listening in.
Thank you.